There's been litigation over the past few decades between Florida, Georgia, and Alabama over this river system, the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint river system. The challenge that has been ongoing is the state's ability to share this water in a way that everybody's needs get met.
Florida is suing the state of Georgia because it's overusing its water resources.
23 years later, I find myself in the delta of that river system discussing some of the same issues that were affecting the system 23 years ago.
The decades-long dispute is affecting businesses up and down this street in Apalachicola.
It's been tough to see, these people have to go find other work.
Florida has suffered harm from the decreased fresh water flows.
We all depend on it. And what they don't let us have, it destroys our livelihood.
With all three states having a stake in this river, it's leading to a war over water.
We didn't realize how good we had it.
I got so attached to this place when I was a kid. My parents would bring me out here. And then it was all covered in trees. You could barely see even the earthworks that you see today. But the stories that you would, and you learn more about it and read more about it. And so prehistoric peoples, paddled up and down the river and dug out canoes and traded with each other. And they would trade goods as far north as Tennessee and North Georgia and the mountains. And up there you'll find conch shells and things like that they had brought from the Gulf and traded upstream. And so it's always been an avenue of commerce. Well, when the United States came along, the United States, suddenly this became two separate European-style nations. You had the United States starting at the Georgia line, and you had Spain starting, at the Florida line. And suddenly this Apalachicola River was not the free avenue of commerce that it had been. And so you've had all these dramatic changes through history, but the river is what has tied it together and led to a lot of the violence that has happened, in this valley.
When I got out of college, I went out west and tried to look for a new place and ran rivers out there for about 10 years. And when I came back to the Gulf, which I was missing terribly, I had the opportunity to go to Apalachicola Bay and spend time working for the Nature Conservancy on the small island of Dog Island. And there I got introduced to some of the productivity issues and things that were going on in Apalachicola Bay and began to understand what a really unique and productive system it was. And it was easy to fall in love with. It's about a 19,600 square mile basin, so it's quite large in 3 states. It starts up in the very northern part of Georgia in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains and runs about 500 miles south to the Gulf of Mexico in Florida on the North Gulf Coast. It runs through, or begins up in the granite Piedmont Formation, up closer to the mountains, and then it goes into the Doherty Plain, which is a relatively flat, more lime rock based geology, and then comes into the Apalachicola and drops down into the coastal plain before it enters the Gulf of Mexico.
This is a place that is so rich in history and culture. People, I believe, with the knowing the story better, I think a line of people would form to come here. And that's one of the real shames of this and of the Apalachicola Basin itself, is that we have so much here that people don't know is here. This was the largest colony of free African Americans in North America at the time it existed. They had put their foot down and declared that they were free people, and they fought to the death for their freedom. This part of the bluff projects out into the river just a little bit. And if you look to the south, you can see for 2 miles down the river, which was probably about the maximum range of the cannons here. So for 2 miles, if an enemy ship approached, they could fire on them from this point. When the battle took place here on July 27th, 1816, the American gunboats came into range at as far down as you can see on the river. American troops and Creek warriors have surrounded the fort for a week at this point. They've not been able to make even a dent in the defenses of the fort, and so they decide they're going to bring the gunboats up. The Americans fired 5 shots from 2 different boats. They fired 4, just kind of testing the range, and then they thought, well, maybe we can lob one over behind the fort. And what happened was it hit a pine tree and ricocheted off of a pine tree down into the gunpowder magazine. The Army estimated that 270 died in a flash, just gone. These were people who came here and became free, and they fought for that freedom rather than surrender and go back into slavery. This river basin is full of this type of history. People don't know these stories. You know, within a couple of miles of where we stand is one of the largest colonies of pitcher plants in the world. And you have all of those kinds of things, the Toria trees and the Florida yew trees, you know, further north, the estuary and the oyster beds and the seafood and all of that. There is so much here that I think we're better suited now to preserve it than we would have been 50 or 60 years ago had it developed.
I grew up just upstream on the floodplain of the Flint River, and spent a lot of time on that river fishing and recreating as a kid. Went to school in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. My role here at the Coastal and Marine Lab is I'm a fisheries biologist. My expertise is life history of fishes, particularly age growth and reproduction. There are a number of different commercially and recreationally important species that depend on a healthy Apalachicola River, not just in terms of water quality, but in terms of water quantity. Things that we love to eat and catch, bay scallops, shrimp, blue crabs, groupers, even endangered species like sturgeon are tied to a healthy Apalachicola River. So it's really important for us to ensure for future generations that we take care of this river system.
You have a fishing industry that is built on the productivity that occurs in both inshore in the bay, in the estuary, and offshore where the mature species are. So oysters, obviously, they don't move around much, so they're confined there in the bay. And the salinity of the bay and the productivity of the oysters is all driven again by those nutrients that come in.
My great-granddaddy's a fisherman. My granddaddy was mostly a shrimperman, oysterman. My dad was a crabber, oysterman. Me, I love to do it all. I mean, until the 2000s, I considered myself as a commercial fisherman. I did it all. Growing up here, when we had, we used to work in the bay, enjoy the bay, come up here and then weekends enjoy the river system. We used to make river trips all the way up to Lake Seminole and going up, up there on oyster boats. We'd 5 or 6 oyster boats get together and 20 people or so and do a weekend cruise up at Lake Seminole. Stay the night up there and come back. We used to, really enjoy what we had, but things just got so tight and so hard. The funding, having extra money is hard now.
I have the 13-mile oyster house. I have a 13-mile retail market in town. I have a shrimp house, processing plant, ice house, shrimp boats, oyster boats, trucks. We do a little bit from start to almost the end game, selling to the restaurants, and seafood markets and things like that. My dad bought it from my mother's side of the family December 1957. Then it was primarily just an oyster house. We had a few small bay shrimp boats that we unloaded here. And the year I started kindergarten, we moved to Apalachicola, which is 13 miles from here. And my dad got into the shrimp business as well. And then it just grew from there.
I've been fishing since I was 16 years old. I'm 51 now, so quite a while. The water wars has really affected us down here on the bottom end.